Welcome to Masters of Influence and our reading of the 48 Laws of Power. I started reading this book a while back and really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the descriptions of the different laws of power. And I was fascinated by how I kept seeing these different laws pop up all over the place. And I'm not saying that it's the end all be all of laws or power, but I think there's some really interesting stuff that we can take away from these 48 laws. And like I say, you just see examples of this all the time and such that I think it's worth a conversation going through these laws.
Power moves in the shadows and out in the open. Do you see it? Hosted by Jeff Lair, Masters of Influence uncovers the tactics of persuasion, control, and decision-making that shape history, business, and everyday life. Through stories, interviews, and expert insights, we pull back the curtain on the forces shaping our world. Let's decode power together.
So our plan is to go through them not one by one. That would take quite a while, but we're going to
Yeah.
group them into different categories of laws. So they're going to be groups of laws. And I'm Jeff Lair. I'm doing this with Joe Rojas. Joe, I don't think I even introduced you in the last one,
No,
but
you did in the last one, and
okay.
now you did again. So that's good.
And now I did again. So Joe and I eventually we won't bother with the introductions because it's going to be pretty obvious. But good. So Joe and I we're going to talk about this over a few weeks and just go into each one of these categories of power. And today we're going to talk about foundational power. This is I've looked at these and found six that I think really fit into this foundational power area. I think there's six, right? No, five.
Yeah, five,
Of
five.
course.
Yeah, five.
Because why would I get the number right the first time? I mean, that's just too easy.
Well, you
So
started with the sixth one, so that's why.
oh, that's what it is. Yeah, I
Yeah, it
started with the
says you're
sixth one.
looking at
Yeah,
you.
I did that to confuse you, Joe. That's my intent in life is to find ways to confuse the people around me. It's one of my power bases. I am sure it is covered in the 48. We'll come back to that. But even before we get
Yeah.
there, I read some of the reviews of 48 Laws and I was sort of charmed that there were so many that were like, "Oh, this is evil and this is terrible and this is, this is bad and how dare they?" And I guess I just wanted to pose the question before we go into what power is and how power is used and what the laws of power are. Is power ethical, Joe? What do you think? Is power ethical?
Well, I think you want to separate power from the use of power,
Okay.
and I think you want to separate power from the people. Can power be ethical? Absolutely,
Well, and I think
completely.
that
Right?
I think that's kind of the point, right? It's
Yeah.
so whatever side you're on. Let's say there's A and B, there's A, B, C, and D. I don't believe in two sides to every argument. I think there are like 25
There's
sides
like
to every
25
argument.
sides. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
why they have
So
20
so
sided dice.
so let's say that there's like A, B, C, and D, and everybody's against each other. And if only A has power, B, C, and D don't have power. If B,
Hmm.
C, and D say we don't want power, we don't believe in power, well then how are they ever going to counter? How are they ever going to get their ideas out there against A? And I heard this interview with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez
Hmm.
and her approach to power. Someone asked her this question. They said, what is power? Is it ethical for you to be wielding power? And she made that point. If we don't try to take power, if we don't try to exert power, then we're never going to have a voice. Someone else is always going to dominate. And I think that that's crucial for us to understand when we talk about power. We called this podcast Masters of Influence rather than Masters of Power because I think that there's a connection between influence and power. And it's really about how you can use power to influence, use power to have more of an influence. But that also brings to mind Cialdini and his influence levers, how you
Yeah.
influence. And he talks a lot about the ethics of influence and being
No kidding.
ethical in
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
approach to influence. And I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind is also defining ethics as we define power. Also thinking about what we want to achieve and whether our goals and the things that we want to achieve meet some sort of ethical
Yeah.
line. And ethics are going to depend on the person defining the ethics 100%. But
Yeah, but
at the end of the day, we have to sort of strive for that ethics. And give me just one more
yeah,
second, Joe.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think one of the reasons that people react to the 48 laws as if this weren't written ethically, as if they weren't ethical, is I do think that Green has used some incendiary language here. He's talking about your opposition is suckers, and he puts them down. He talks about it in
He
terms
talks about your
of,
mark, your mark.
yeah, your
You
mark,
gotta,
and
yeah,
minimizing the other side, and this
yeah,
is a little bit different from Cialdini's, "Hey, we're gonna be ethical about things here," right?
yeah.
Green doesn't bother with ethics, and I think that's on purpose. I think that sells books, right? But I don't think that that means that we have to. I think that makes it more fun to read, but I don't think that means that we have to think of everybody as a mark or a sucker. It's more about how we have influence and how we get ideas out there, and how we can steer the economy, how we can steer our businesses, how we can steer our lives, how we don't get controlled by all of the forces that are out there. And that for me is the key thing. Is how are we not going to be controlled? How do we take power over our own lives? How do we not get steamrolled by these political influences? And I think these laws are a great way for us to think about that,
and
regardless of the writing,
and
which I
that's
just find fun to read.
and it's utilizing the fundamental framework without getting pulled into the nefarious thinking, the nefarious thinking that, because he talks about some of these things, Green, very nefariously, like it was like,
Yeah,
like it, like,
underhanded.
yeah, like it's underhanded and all those things. But as I was doing research for this episode and really thinking about this episode, I started thinking about, well, who are the people that in my life have been instrumental in 1982, the movie Gandhi came out. I was 12 years old. And I
Mm,
went to see it at the movies because I was very interested in him. And so I went to see it at the movies. And I got what power can look like when
yeah,
you use power ethically
yeah.
and the
Well, and we're
impact.
actually gonna do another
Yeah.
episode. You don't know this yet, but I
Yeah.
have an episode planned
Yeah.
about Gandhi and the salt marches, and
And
there's
that's,
actually a really interesting parallel
yeah.
to what's happening today. But that's an aside, everybody. That's
Yeah.
that's coming. It's like, what do we call this? A foreshadowing,
A
or
foreshadowing of what's
we're
coming.
gonna
So,
open some loops here. But I agree. So you can see how
yeah.
Gandhi used power. But I mean, I think as well, we use power in our relationships. Who to decide what's for dinner. Power with our kids. We exert power over our kids. Certainly, we have some pretty legitimate power over our kids, and then I think there is a process by which we cede power back to our kids.
Yes.
And that power dynamic over time is interesting. You're looking at power and influence when you're negotiating to get your car fixed, when you're buying a car. One of my favorite stories in buying a car actually is I bought a Honda CRV years and years and years ago. And I was we were negotiating for the car. And you know how they always come back at you and they're like, "Well, do you want this
Yeah.
thing or that thing or whatnot?" But I mean, I wanted everything. So I just went in there and I said, "Well, these are the prices that I'm willing to pay for it. And I want all of the extras because I love all the extras. Like a
Yeah.
car for me without the extras is pointless." So I wanted everything. And then there was the alarm, and there was the alarm. And I knew what price I was willing to pay for the alarm. I remember I was willing to pay $99 for the alarm, and they wanted $3.99. They wanted 399 cents. Wait a minute.
$399.
Yeah, $399. And and the guy came back to me, and he said, "Well, this alarm, yeah, $99. It's we've already installed it, and it's gonna take us an hour of labor just to take the alarm out. And behind them was like the cost of their labor. It's like $150 an hour. I don't think it was that much. I think it was like 75 bucks an hour or something. And I looked at that and I said, well, wow, That's gonna cost you 75. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I will take it off your hands if you only pay me 37.50, and that saves you $37. Like, because I really don't wanna make this hard for you. I really wanna make your life easier, and the guy
Yeah.
looked at me like, what just
What? What
happened?"
just
And
happened?
I ended up getting the alarm for half of what I was willing to pay for because the guy gave me all the power in the negotiation. But
Yes.
but you have to know that. You have to be there present for it in order to and to not be taken in by all of the other conversations that are going on. And there's even power that you can exert over the phone company. It's when you're, well, not much, but sometimes, negotiating for a raise, your new job. So I think power is crucial for everything that we are doing on a
Mhm.
day-to-day basis and the influence we want to have, and for us actually living our purpose. Not to get too philosophical here, but for living your purpose, you're going to have some power.
Absolutely. If you don't have any power, it's not about having power, but if you don't exert power, then you're just at the whim of whoever's in front of you, whether it's the guy at the car dealership or the phone
Right.
company or your kids or and I see this with parents sometimes. I remember this is the best, okay? This is the best. We're traveling with my kids. My son is 4 years old. We're at the airport in Panama, right? We're going to Costa Rica. We're at the airport in Panama, right? And we're walking around the airport. It's a great airport. So we're walking around the
Yep.
airport. They have all these shops. They have all this stuff. And they had a bakery like a full blown bakery in the airport with all this beautiful freaking cakes and all this stuff, right? And my
That
son,
sounds very Latin American,
yeah.
actually. That's pretty brilliant.
So my son goes up and he's got his face against the glass and he's looking at this piece of cake and he said, "I want that piece of cake." And we were like walking to boarding and I'm like, "No, you can't have the piece of cake." And he's like, for the first time ever, he did this. He had never done this. And it's because all day at the airport we have been seeing this, right?
Yeah.
He throws himself on the ground and he has a full tantrum. And it had been happening with other kids. He'd been seeing other kids doing that all day. He's like, I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna try that thing out. I'm gonna try it out, see if it
So
works,
funny.
right? So he throws himself on the ground, right? So I stand there for a second. I'm shocked, right? Because I'm like, he's never done this before. And in my mind, I'm going, what am I going to do, right? I'm watching him. I'm looking at all the people are starting to gather around him, right? So, so I throw myself on the ground next to him. I'm like, I'm not gonna get it. I'm not gonna get it. And he stands up, right? And he looks at me, and he's like, I'm leaving. He walks away like I don't know that guy, and I'm like, hey, where you going? Where you going, buddy? Right? And so
Yeah,
they
but it's
know
funny
from the
how
time they're
kids
four. Yeah.
it's funny how kids really key into those power dynamics, and they're always like trying to stretch and see where the powers are. I remember when Kenneth threw a tantrum. He threw one tantrum once in a in
That
a
was it. That was it
a
for Max. That was
supermarket.
his
He
one
did it one
tantrum.
time, and I think he might have been 3. I don't know. I don't even
Yeah.
remember exactly when this was, but I do remember that he threw a tantrum, and so my wife just walked away. And she's like, "Okay, whatever. You go on and do your thing." And he never did it again. And it is a thing. If you give into the tantrum, then you're saying, "Hey, you have the power over me. Anytime you throw a tantrum, I'm going to do what you want me to do." And my wife understood that very well. And
Very well.
she just walked away, and he never threw a tantrum again. Never. He still doesn't throw tantrums. I mean, now he's an engineer and works in with big companies, right?
Big
I
companies and
imagine that
big
they
data
don't put up with
centers. Yeah.
tantrums either. But I think that kids do key into these pretty easily. So let's go. Let's chat about what these first 5 laws are. And there's no real science to my grouping here. This is Jeff's thinking around how these things come together. So I'm calling these sort of like foundational rules mostly because I didn't have another word. But I also do think that these are pretty foundational to the way that the way that we exert and create power, right? And by the way, you said something interesting. You said somebody has power, doesn't have power. And I that struck a chord with me. I think we all actually have power. I think there's a question as to whether or not we claim it.
Yeah.
And I think we often
Yeah.
don't know how to claim power. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do I do more to claim the power that I have? How do I do more to consolidate the power? Because that we have very powerful means of communication. We have very powerful means of influence at our disposal in ways that we haven't had before, which is a problem. It's a blessing and a curse, right? But we have power. The question is how do we claim and exert it, right? But anyway, so foundational powers, foundational laws. Law number one is to never outshine the master,
Mm.
and this is the idea of if you're working for somebody else, anytime that there's somebody else more superior to you, you really don't want to make them look bad, which I did learn in a boardroom at one point, and we can chat about that in a minute. So
I
I
want to
did I
hear
did
that
learn
story.
that law being escorted from a boardroom, and then related to that is to number 6, to court attention at all costs, and that everything is judged by what's seen, and so you want that attention. So you don't want to outshine the master, but you really want to be sure that you are getting attention, that people are seeing you, that you're making a splash out there. And that's the no no press is bad press, right? No coverage is bad coverage, because if you can get your name out there, you can do something with that. However, at the same time, law number 5, so much depends on reputation.
Mm.
Guard it with your life, because once people think of you in a certain way, you can recreate yourself. That's another law, but you know you become pigeonholed, and it's hard for you to get out of that. Whereas if you can build a reputation, if you can build that brand and strengthen that brand, then people understand you within a certain way. And I will say that we're talking about the current regime, we're talking about politics in some of these things, and there is a brilliance to how Trump plays the reputation and attention at all costs and
Game.
never
Yeah.
outshine the master games. Like there's just a brilliance there that you have to marvel at. Like the chutzpah, the courage, like it's unbelievable, right? Then we get into rule 9, which is to win through actions and never through argument. That it's actions that determine things. Like if you convince somebody with an argument, that conviction is weak. That conviction is that they're not really on your side. If you have to convince somebody, if you have to cajole somebody,
Yeah.
they don't actually support
Yeah.
you. Then there's number 16 that I've thrown in here too, which is to use absence to increase respect and honor. I think that there is a
Yeah.
desire for us to be there the whole time. We want to be in front of people, but we sort of miss the opportunity that exists in absence, in scarcity, in
Yeah.
not being
Yeah.
always available.
Yeah.
So I think taken together, if we can think of these as some foundational laws, that if we start applying these in our daily lives, we can start to consolidate some of that power. So let me just turn it over to you, Joe. What do you think? What struck you in terms of reading these powers? What thoughts do you have? What did you like? What did you not like? How valid do you think they are? What are some of your thoughts?
That's a lot of good questions you asked at the same time. Hold on.
Well, just what struck you
I
as
know.
as you
Well,
as you
one of the things that struck me for about Law 16, use absence to increase respect and honor, right?
yeah.
And it really made me think about Mandela, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
it wasn't optional for him to use absence to to increase
Yeah.
respect and
Yeah.
honor.
Yeah.
It wasn't optional, but when it happened, he really did. And and we don't think about these things in these terms, right? But he really used Law 16 and Law 9, right?
Who, Mandela?
Yeah, and Law 9, win through your actions, never through your argument, right? So they come, they open the jail door. They're like, come on, we'll let you free. And he's like, can I keep talking about apartheid? They're like, no. They're like, that's okay. I'll stay here. Hold on, let me
Yeah,
shut that door for you.
yeah,
Clink,
yeah.
right? And so I know I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but but see, that's through his actions, not through his argument. Like it was very clear. So so a lot of these things struck me because we often think about power as force,
Mhm.
but force and power are two different animals.
Yeah.
You know?
Force is sort of one part of power. There
Yeah.
is th there's some circumstances in which you use force, f but you're right in that force is one type of power. It's one section of power, and I think that's also what's very interesting. And when we start talking about ethics, we're not talking about beating people up.
No.
Your point around Nelson Mandela, who, by the way, for everybody, I've lived in South Africa for a number of years, and I refer to Nelson Mandela as Madiba. That's what I learned that both in sort of spirit and linguistically. Madiba is a word for father, and that's
Mhm.
how he is referred to in South Africa. So it just seems strange to me now to call him Nelson,
Yeah.
but so I refer to him as Madiba. So
Diva.
so
Yeah.
when Madiba was taking these actions, he did actually establish his brand, his reputation before going to jail, which was interesting.
Yes.
And then he was in jail, and then that absence actually did make him stronger. And this is something that people, the strong man forgets, right? That we lock people up, and that locking them up or making them into martyrs is is a bad move, because
Yes.
we're strengthening their reputation, right? We're removing them out of a group, which
Yeah.
which makes them more attracted. Now people want to know more about him. Now he's out of the group. It's like, oh, I want to know more about him, not less. And it also, I think, conveys a certain humility. So now, Madiba's in jail, and it makes him look more humble. It makes him look like the oppressed. I think that opens up these opportunities to win through actions. And I will say it goes further than that, because when he did come out of jail, there was this conversation that he was having with the cleric at the time. And what's also very interesting about the transition of power in South Africa is there could have been a very bloody war. And by all rights, you know, nobody would have said, "Hey, you guys are wrong for having a
Yeah.
bloody war."
Yeah.
But they didn't have a bloody war. And they didn't have a bloody war because of the actions that both leaders took. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just hyperbole, it wasn't just rhetoric, but they took decisive actions. De Klerk made a point of negotiating with Madiba in private. Then they came out together. Then they planned the actions and the presentation in a way that dramatically strengthened the power of the movement, of the negotiation. Because if they hadn't done these things, if they hadn't launched the truth and reconciliation, if they hadn't
Yeah.
gone down these paths, there would have been a lot more violence in that transition. So I,
But
I
see,
think that's a really good example. I'll tell you my board story, right? We've actually talked about this a little bit in terms of my gold mine example, right? So there was this situation in which I was working for a company that actually had 5 gold mines, and they wanted to close 2 of them, and I showed them how they were going to lose money as a result of doing this. So there was a perception that these mines were costing the company money, and and I showed them how that wasn't true, and I put the numbers up, and the CEO really didn't want me to do this, right? And in that case, I was the consultant and the CEO was the master. And I ignored this never outshine the master, and I went straight at it. And I was like, "No, this is a dumb idea." Right? So I was like, "Look how smart I am. I can show you how you're going to lose money." And I did this in front of his peers, and he was oddly enough not happy about that.
I can't understand that, Jeff. I don't know why he wasn't happy.
And
I
it
don't know.
wasn't good. It wasn't good for my
What do you think about
reputation.
that?
I did get some additional attention as the security guards were escorting me out of the room, but I certainly wasn't my actions weren't supporting my arguments. I wasn't winning anybody over with what I was doing, and I think that I think that we fall into this trap a lot. Like, we look at people who are doing stupid things. We look at the senior people around us who are doing stupid things, and we're like,
Mm.
"Hey, don't do that. It's stupid." I don't know. Can you think of any examples from your life?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was doing this when I was in advanced individual training in the army.
Mhm.
I was doing this project, like we were doing this like restoration of a clinic, right?
Yeah.
And there was a sergeant that was in charge of it, and then there was a drill sergeant that was that sergeant's boss, right? And the guy that was in charge of the project, I don't know if he had no construction experience or nothing, but he was just doing a lot of dumb things, right? And I kept trying
Mhm.
to tell him, but he was just like, "You just shut up, soldier. And you're private. You don't know anything private. Just go over there, private, right?" And one day the drill sergeant came, and I found my way over to the drill sergeant and said, "Hey, drill sergeant, if we did this different, we did that different, we did that different, we would get much better results." And
Yeah.
he calls the sergeant over, and I mean, he dresses the guy down. "Why are you using this private? Has been trying to talk to you." And so I found myself in KP duty. I don't know if you know what KP is, but I was washing dishes for the next like 12 weekends from 8 o'clock in the morning to about 8 o'clock at night. Because the thing that I didn't know about that sergeant is that he had power over what I was going to be doing at any given time. And instead of
Yeah.
my cushy construction job, I was
You were now washing
I
dishes.
was in a kitchen that
And you
feeds
got some attention as a
that feeds.
result, which
Oh
is
yeah, yeah,
nice,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's certainly not the attention that you were courting.
Oh
But I
my
think
goodness.
so it's, there's an interesting I do think, like in my example, what I did learn. Oh, by the way, the end of the story is like, I don't know, 18 months later, I was back in the CEO's office talking about how we were going to explain this shit show to his investors, right? I mean, this is a multinational company that traded on the stock exchange. And he's like, "All right, this was a shit show. How are we going to explain it?" And what I didn't do then was say, "Yeah, I told you this was going to be a shit show." Because I had
You
learned
didn't want to get
I
escorted
had
again.
learned a lesson, and I brought some humility to the situation, right? But in all of these cases, I do think we have to play within the rules, and I think that there's a line between sycophancy and sort of respecting the political situation, right? So I think if we look at the current political regime, there's this demand for sycophants. You
Yes.
must do what I say the way I say it. You can never go against me. And anybody who plays up to that rule is just a sycophant. You can't do anything without outshining the master. And I think there's a difference between that and realizing that your boss is your boss, and realizing that if you have good ideas, you go to your boss and they may take the ideas and they may not, and you don't necessarily know why. But when you go over their head to their boss, and they dress down the
Yeah.
person you work for. It's never gonna work out well for you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, there are better ways to do this. So even if your boss fails, you support them, and it's not kissing their ass. It's about making sure that you're sort of respecting the challenges that they face
It,
as well. And I think that by not outshining the master, you actually end up with more opportunity to act and take actions and build a reputation that can enhance your reputation with your boss, with the master, right? Without you making them look bad. You
it,
just don't get a lot of power by making people look bad.
yeah. And it's not just, I was just thinking about the book itself and the particular example in the book of never outshine the master, right?
Mhm.
It's a political thing. It's not just about
Ah,
your boss's head or making your
true.
boss look bad to, like in this particular case, all the guy did, he threw a party that was so fancy, so schmancy that it made the king's parties look like, and so all people were talking about was the
Yeah, so you're
party.
talking about Nicholas Fouquet and
Yeah.
Louis XIV, and
Yeah.
what and the story that Green tells is how Nicholas threw this massive party, and he invited Louis XIV to the party, and he tried to make it
And
extravagant to
he did
impress
it
the
to
king.
impress the king. Yeah.
Right, but the king thought, "Hey, this guy's he looks like a better party thrower than I am," and he ended up, I can't remember exactly
He
what
threw him in
what happened.
jail.
He
He
was
threw him in jail.
arrested by the king's head musketeer. I didn't even realize that was a designation. He went on trial for stealing from the treasury, and he was thrown into prison. I think, yeah, so he spent the last 20 years of his life in solitary confinement thanks to throwing a party that upstaged the king. And, you know, I think it's understanding that they they have feelings too,
Yeah.
right? And they don't and people don't like to be insulted. I
But
think
some
that's
you
that's a
think you're
really
doing
important point.
something because he threw the party in honor of the king, right? But the
Right,
party
right. So it
was,
was all to
yeah,
support the king, but he
yeah.
made them look bad because he threw too good a party.
So it's
I like
really,
this this
you have
comment
to
that Green
remember
puts in
your,
here.
yeah.
I like how Green says, "Commit harmless mistakes that will not hurt you in the long run,
Hmm.
but that will give you a chance to ask for his help." And this is some of the language that I think Green gets in trouble with. Masters adore such requests, right?
Mm,
Adore such requests. A
yeah.
master who cannot bestow on you the gifts of his expertise may direct rancor and ill will at you instead. Wow.
Yeah.
But I do think that as someone who manages people, it is I don't know if it's quite so petty, but there is something about when people are coming in there asking and they're inquisitive and they're interested, then it's a lot easier to give them more rope, more responsibility, more say over what they're doing because they're listening. And I definitely think if you come up and you're trying to make the master look bad all the time,
Hmm.
you're not going to win a lot of friends. You're not going to
Nope.
win a lot of
Nope.
friends. So how do you court attention, right, without outshining the masters?
I'm just thinking.
So
Yeah. So yeah.
the example that Green gives is P.T. Barnum, and that this is really aside from master or not master, but he is a public figure, and he is out trying to get attention. He bought, and the example that Green gives is how Barnum purchased the carcass of what was purported to be a mermaid, and then the creature resembled a monkey with the body of a fish, but basically this was all a scam. And I think that the point of this is just the way he kept coming up with these oddities and putting these oddities up there, and it didn't matter that people thought they were real or not real, or that they
Hmm.
liked them or they didn't like them, or what it said about him or how it said about him. The point was that he was he was gaining attention, and with that attention, he could do anything. He could build his business, and I think that that's something that we see with Trump, who's courting attention at all costs. You know, he'll take anything. He'll take the Access Hollywood tapes. He'll take anything that gets him on the news cycle. He just dominates the news cycle day in and day out, and as a result, he's all anybody's talking about. It's hard not to talk about him. It's hard not to have to
Yeah.
pay attention to him, you know?
But speaking about him specifically, because you asked me a question, right? Which is, how do you court attention without upsetting the master, right? And if you look at the VP right now, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
He's masterful at that.
Oh, interesting.
Every time he opens his mouth, he's like, our President Trump, our, like, he doesn't open his mouth without some form of adoration coming out before. That's the preface to everything that he's going to say. Is that, like, everything is Trump's idea, nothing is my idea, but he's telling you his ideas. If you actually listen to what he says, they're his
Right.
ideas,
He's always
but it's
talking about
all
it as if it's the master's
but
idea,
it's
right?
always a master's idea, right? And so he's very, very masterful, and he's sneaky good at
Mm.
it, right? And it's really interesting because I watch him speak, and sometimes it gives me like, ay, ¿cómo se dice? I'm sorry. I can think
Está
of the
bien,
word in
está bien.
Spanish. The word in English is disgust, but it's not. It makes me.
Asco?
Me da asco, pero asco de verdad, pero como que me hace la piel. It makes
It's
my
like it gives you
the
goosebumps.
heebie-jeebies. It gives you the heebie-jeebies.
The
You know, it gives.
heebie-jeebies, there you go.
Yeah. So it does, because he speaks uh with this reverence that, if you're really listening, you can see it's not a real reverence.
Right.
It's
And
it's
I
a
think
it's
this
a
is the
it's a
key.
tactic not to outshine the master.
This is the key to how people
Yeah.
manipulate Trump is that he's actually so thin-skinned and so narcissistic that if you can really easily influence him by playing to that insecurity, by talking about these things, by really reinforcing how wonderful he is, even if you're doing something else. And I think that that's a really important point, you know. But
So
I
hold
think
on here.
and I think that, the thing that he has to look out for is that reputation sign. So a quote from Green: "Reputation has a power like magic. With one stroke of its wand, it can double your strength. It can also send people scurrying away from you." And
Mm,
and there is an element of that, reputation issue around who are you really? Who do people believe that you are? And if you have a certain reputation and then the world changes, it's going to be harder for him to back away from that, right? So if you think of all of the Republicans who are currently in power, if they realize that if the world wakes up and the MAGA cult stops being as strong as it is, it will be difficult for them to recover their reputations, I think.
yeah.
When Stalin left, the brutality of Stalin also left. It's not to say that Russia completely changed, but the brutality changed. There was a shift.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
whether the party could have continued it, whether Khrushchev could have actually maintained that, I don't know. I don't know that he wanted to, but
Yeah.
there's certainly you do see these things shifting, and it will be interesting to see. I mean, at some point, like I said, he's going to die. I mean, he's like 80 years old and unhealthy, right? So at some point, that's going to happen. You know. So
All
so
right.
so then, what who how does that reputation power evolve is going to be an interesting one. And then just thinking of winning through actions, I like this. A couple of quotes here that I have is in the realm of power, right? This comes from the book. In the realm of power, you must learn to judge your moves by their long-term effect on other people. The problem in trying to prove a point or gain a victory through argument is that in the end, you can never be certain how it affects the people that you're arguing with. And I
Mm,
like to give an example just to exemplifying this. I didn't
mm,
know I was exemplifying this, but I have been. When I was in a communication course in college, and the professor would come in, and at the very beginning, like in the second session, or something, he would just take somebody down. He would just berate them for talking, or for, this is not acceptable in this class. And the thing is that this professor was this big sort of teddy bear of a guy. Everybody loved him, and he was just like so nice and so, and so what was interesting is that was actually staged.
mm.
I found out about this later. He said he staged that, and he did it because he knew he was a nice guy, and he knew that people would take advantage. And so instead of telling everybody, "Hey, please be quiet. By being quiet, you're going to get more out of this course," he staged this event so that people are like, "Oh, shh, I gotta shit.
Yeah.
I gotta pay
Ah,
attention
I
here.
don't
Like,
pay
I
attention
I don't
here.
want I don't want the nice professor to kick my ass in front of everybody else, right?"
Yeah.
And I think that that's really an interesting way to think about this. And there's another good story in the book. And just going back to Russia, since
Hmm.
we're at Stalin, why not, right?
Why not? Why not?
And
And
and it
since
goes
we're
like
living in
this,
these times,
since we're living in these times. But a heckler once interrupted Nikita Khrushchev in the middle of a speech in which he was denouncing the crimes of Stalin. And the heckler said, "You were a colleague of Stalin's. Why didn't you stop him then?"
Hmm.
Khrushchev apparently couldn't see the heckler, and he barked out, "Who said that?" And no hand went up. No one moved a muscle. And after a few seconds of silence, Khrushchev finally said in a quiet voice, "Now you know why I didn't stop him."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now if I'd put my head
The
up,
hand up.
if I put
Then
my
then
hand
my
up,
then my head
it
would have
would
been
have been
chopped
cut
off.
off. And all of you just felt that. So let's move on. And I think that that's actually a really brilliant example of winning through actions rather than just trying to make an argument that, well, I tried, I tried to stand up to Stalin, but he was so mean and big, and I felt
Yeah.
bad about it.
Yeah.
It's not usually a good way to win.
No. No, no, no. You have to put the people, you have to cause the pucker effect. I am sure that when he said that, the pucker effect was palpable in the
Yes.
air for everybody. And in that moment, when he said, "That's why it is," everybody got it, and that was it. This is done, done. Oh, we
Yeah.
can unpucker now.
Everybody got it, and they go, "Oh, okay, cool." They were probably all a little bit afraid that there was a sniper,
Yeah, yeah.
who who actually did know who said the thing,
Yeah,
and they were ready for the sniper to actually come out and take them out.
yeah,
And when you said that, they realized that they could breathe again. But that is exactly the experience, right? That moment of communication that goes well beyond
and
the
speaking of
argument.
power, I'm sorry, but speaking of power, if you're the speaker, you have to be present in that way that you could cause that level of pregnant pause that puts everybody in a mental frame that where you can cause an experiential moment rather than try
Sure.
to have then sort it out, right? So it's really important if you want to do, if you want to lead that way, if you want to if you want to have that kind of power, that you're paying attention that way, and that you can answer things that way.
And I think that we can do that more than we think. It definitely is. If you're standing in front of a group, if you are the leader of a country, you definitely have more opportunities to exert that kind of power. But I think at the same time, this happens to us in little ways all the time. There are lots of ways in which we can we can show rather than say, and ways that you can actually show things. You can demonstrate the argument without even ever making the argument. And I think this is one way that you can not outshine the master and exert some sort of control is when you are giving examples, when you are demonstrating instead of arguing with somebody, right? Like
Yeah.
if and if you can like demonstrate, show something that gets done and then give the credit back to the master, that's the sort of thing that really wins you a lot of favors, and that's something to think about.
Well, it's funny. You give the credit back to the master, give the praise to the master, right? Um,
Right.
I was listening to Fareed Zakaria yesterday, right? And he said, because he was talking after what happened with Zelensky, and the
Yeah.
whole shouting match in the Oval Office. He said, "Look, this is the only thing Zelensky did wrong. If he would have showed up, right, and he would have said, "Oh, Mr. Trump, President Trump, we created the highest honor ever created in Ukraine. The super duper presidential award that we came to bestow upon you," and he
That's
and he did the
interesting. Yeah,
right
yeah,
thing. "We're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
let you build the largest Trump Tower in Ukraine that has ever been built." That the conversation would have gone completely different. Like that.
And what's interesting as well is that he did bring a gift, right? He brought this heavyweight belt or something, some sort of thing, right?
Hmm.
And it was a gift, but you know what? That would have been a more powerful gift, right? Because this didn't mean anything to Trump. It was about
Yeah,
somebody else. It was meaningful for Ukraine. It wasn't meaningful for Trump. But if
exactly.
if Zelensky had been able to come in and said, before we go any farther, President Air Trump, you know,
Yeah,
sir, I want to give you the highest honor that Ukraine has ever created. I mean, like you just said, is that would have really diffused the situation. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know that he realized that he was walking into a trap, but I think the next person will get it. And I think
yeah.
that if you go and you just create some little whatever, and you go in and you make him feel like the big man, and you give him these things, it's going to be really hard for him to to act against that, because that plays so directly into his ego.
I
And you
call
don't have
it.
to convince anybody. You just put it
Yeah,
right out there in front of him.
I call it the TikTok strategy.
The TikTok strategy. Do tell, Joe. What's the
Well,
TikTok
the
strategy?
TikTok strategy, right? So every politician, everybody was for banning TikTok, right? And TikTok's days were numbered, and TikTok was
Yeah.
almost over. And then all of a sudden, the TikTok algorithm changed, and Trump became the number one trending thing on TikTok.
Huh, I didn't know that. Sure. Yeah. So don't make an
And,
argument that TikTok's good. Just make the master look great.
and all of a sudden, TikTok's on the chopping block. We were going to ban,
Yeah.
and then you see Trump say it. We were going to ban TikTok, but I'm really popular on TikTok. He says
Yeah,
it
he's funny.
straight,
He says it.
straight,
He says
straight,
it
like
right.
he just
He says
tells you to your face.
he says, "Oh, I am a child. I am a mindless child, and all I really care about is that somebody pays attention to me, and then I will go against all of my principles and beliefs in order to support that person." And that is a really powerful observation as well. Really interesting, and that's so I think that that's one way that people can start using these powers against Trump, but there are also things for us to think about in terms of
Well, look,
engaging with other people,
the
right?
guy who did it so masterfully was the King of Jordan,
Mm,
right? King of Jordan. He said, you have to take all these Palestinians. You have to take whatever. He gave him a number. I can't remember what the number was, right? And the king of Jordan said, "You're right. We'll take that many children and we'll give them medical treatment, and then we'll send them back." But then Trump said Jordan said they would take X amount of people from Gaza, but didn't complete that sentence.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's also interesting. So I do wanna tell another story here, and the story is about Michelangelo, and he's putting the final touches on the statue, and Soderini, who was Florence's mayor and who had commissioned Michelangelo to actually do the work, and he saw himself as a connoisseur of art, and so he goes in and he looked at this work, and of course, this is, I think this is what the David, right? So he's, you know, which everybody pretty much thinks is perfect. Those who know, I don't know anything about sculpture. Anyway, so Michelangelo, he thought it was magnificent. The nose he said was too big. So Michelangelo realized that Soderini was standing in a place right under the giant figure and did not have the proper perspective. So what does he do? Right. So what he could do is he could say, "Hey, go look at it from here," and try and convince the guy, but you never know whether he's really convinced and what's going to happen. Without saying a word, he gestured for Soderini to follow him up the scaffolding. So now he can see it at the right perspective. And then reaching the nose, he picked up his chisel as well as a bit of marble dust that lay on the planks. And with Soderini just a few feet below him on the scaffolding, Michelangelo started to tap lightly on the chisel, letting the bits of dust that he gathered in his hands fall little by little. And he did nothing to change the nose. He did nothing to change the nose, but he gave this appearance of working on it. And so a few minutes after that, he stood aside. He said, "Look at it now." And Soderini said, "Oh, I like it much better. You've made it come alive." And that's you know he changed the perspective because he was
Yeah.
looking from the wrong perspective. But he didn't try and convince him. He took his advice. He did the thing. He took the actions, and then had Soderini have this experience so that he discovered it for himself rather than being convinced that something was right, which is, I think, is crucial, and it is something that we can bring into our day-to-day lives, I think, in
Hmm.
terms of being sure that we're showing people, helping people see the things, helping people have the realizations for themselves rather than us trying to convince them, like me with trying to convince the head of this corporation that he was wrong. There probably would have been better ways for me to demonstrate this, or ways that I could have come up with to help him
Him.
have the idea, which
Yes.
is part, ladies and gentlemen, of your responsibility as a consultant is not to make yourself look good. It is to make your client, aka the
So,
master,
yeah.
look good.
And that reminds me of this great blog post that I read by this luminary guy. Oh yeah, Jeff Lair. He's about these
The great
pillars.
luminary Jeff Lair. Yeah, that's a
About
inside joke we'll tell some point.
the about these pillars that don't where is it, in Italy? The pillars that don't quite reach the, or is it yeah,
Those are, yeah, that's actually
in
in the UK, and
the
that was,
UK.
oh my goodness, who was that?
But it's great because it's the same thing like Leonardo did. Leonardo just pretended to chisel the nose, and this guy just pretended to build these columns that are holding up this thing because the and it was, I think it was the mayor too, or the governor. It was either the mayor or the governor, but it was the same
Yeah,
deal.
and it was Christopher Wren who did
Yeah,
that, and it was, again, somebody who commissioned this, and they thought they were smarter than him in terms of weight balancing, and so it was this patio, and he built these columns in order to satisfy the mayor, whoever it was that was paying for it, and the mayor was very happy, and then they noticed that there was an inch gap between the top of the column and the ceiling, and both of them have been standing, for the columns are still there, and they're still disconnected, and the patio is still standing. So clearly Ren's calculations were pretty close to spot on.
yeah.
So the last one here that I want us to chat a little bit about is this: using absence to increase respect
Hmm.
and honor. And the idea here is too much circulation makes the price go down, right? So the more you are seen and heard from, the more common you appear. And this is something that we see how scarcity drives action. And we talked about Madiba being behind bars, and how that drove interest in him and what he was doing. One of the examples that Green gives is he talks about it in terms of love and seduction. And
Mm.
there are a few good stories that sort of relate to this and other powers as well. But his point is that the lover's absence, this is a quote from the book, the lover's absence stimulates your imagination, forming a sort of aura around him or her.
Mm.
But this aura fades when you know too much, when your imagination no longer has room to roam. The loved one becomes a person like anyone else, a person whose presence is taken for granted. And we see that in other areas. We say, absence makes the heart grow
Yeah.
fonder, right? And scarcity helps make sales. And we take actions because we're afraid things are going to go away. So
FOMO, baby.
there
You
is
gotta have that FOMO.
that fear of missing out. Like, all of these things are crucial. Now there's an interesting counter to this. Well, actually, before I get there, and I think that these relate really nicely to these other rules, because we're talking about attention at all
I
costs,
know.
but also making yourself scarce, right? So attention at all costs, but make yourself scarce. And there's this balance, and you see this through the book, these different laws. Some contradict each other, and you have to sort of, I think there's an interesting point within the contradiction. Like, why is this one true and that one true? Like, we've shown how we see both of these playing out in today's politics, in today's environment. So how can they both be true? Green does give an example. He does give a reason why. He says this law only applies once a certain level of power has been attained. So if nobody knows who you are, not being present doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So if I disappear tomorrow, my wife and kids are going to be disappointed. Joe may raise an eyebrow, but at the end of the day, it's not going to change very much, right? But so the need to withdraw only comes after you have established your presence. Leave too early and you do not increase your respect. You are simply forgotten. And I think that as we establish our reputation, as we increase our power through courting attention, we have to look at when is the proper time for us to step out of the relationship. When is the proper time for us to not be available? And I think it's true. Joe's an amazing salesman, for anybody who doesn't know, but I think it's true in sales as well.
Yeah.
One of Joe's favorite quotes is that time kills all deals. And that's, unequivocally true, except that I think there are times when not being able to have access to something, hey, I want this thing. If I want it that badly and I can't get hold of you,
Hmm.
that actually makes it more interesting in
But
my
it
mind.
it does. But you have, so there's two things of that, right? If nobody knows your product, knows what it is, and doesn't, then
Correct.
time kills all deals.
Then it doesn't work,
Now,
right? Then it
if you
doesn't
have
matter.
if you built an iPhone, people will stand online, right?
Right.
If you if you have that Air Jordan, people will stand online. So it's really about, you have to build that reputation, build that brand, and then create the scarcity. But if you
Right.
don't- if you tried the other way around, you make no money.
No, you gotta have the reputation. I
Yeah.
think you can also do it one on one. So you can build the intrigue and the engagement, and on a one on one basis, and then take it away from somebody. And that taking it away is can be very painful. So there's another truism, and I don't think it comes out in the book at all, but this definitely comes into Cialdini's book on influence, is this idea of it's much more painful for people to have things taken away than to be
Hmm.
given. So if they think that they have something and you start to take it away from them, that can be very painful for them. And that's one way that you can, I think, use this this absence in order to
Yeah.
increase the attractiveness of the things that you're selling of yourself.
Yeah. Barbara Streisand and Celine Dion, they know how to do that. Like, oh yeah, yeah, and then no more cons, and then they do a tour, and then it's like, because they create all this scarcity, like I'm never gonna do it again, and then they announce something, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, and so
Yeah, all
it's
of a sudden, "Oh, it is
yeah.
available." Oh, like people that's so exciting, you know?
Madonna too. Madonna will do stuff like this. There's these artists that just don't do anything
Well,
for
I think
this.
it's also
Yeah,
it's the art of the comeback tour, you know?
yeah,
It's the art of, we haven't played for 15 years, but we're back, you know?
yeah,
So, absence means that now
yeah.
all of a sudden there's so much more
Yeah, the Rolling
interesting or
Stones. Yeah,
engaging
the
or
art of
whatever it is. Like, maybe the what?
the Rolling Stones. They're the masters of the
I
art
was
of the
I was thinking
comeback.
of the Rolling Stones,
They're the
and when they first
masters.
came back,
Yeah.
you know, my dad took me on that tour. Like, I must have been a teenager. I must have been in high school, end of high school or something. I don't remember when it was, but it was when the Rolling Stones started playing again. And my dad, who, I don't know, he never does stuff like this. I mean, like maybe 3 times in his life, went out and bought scalped tickets to take
Oh yeah.
me on a school night, to a stadium to watch the Rolling Stones, where we got a contact high from all of the people smoking pot, right? And holy cow, I didn't even know he was that big a fan, but it was like so exciting that the
Yeah.
Rolling Stones were coming back. It was like a blast from the past, and it
Yeah.
is that idea around, hey, it's been gone, now it's back. And I think this is also things like, when we're trying to sell the accelerator, the idea of, it's here and now it's gone, and then it comes back again, that creates that feeling of, oh, it
Hmm.
might get taken away from me, which gives this law, I think, some of its power.
Yeah. Very cool.
So I think those are the 5 laws, right? So court attention at all costs. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Win through your actions, never through argument. Use absence to increase respect and honor, and never outshine the masters. So in our next episode on the 48 laws, we'll talk about adaptability and survival. So anybody who's playing along at home, those laws will be law number 36, disdain things you cannot have. 37, create compelling spectacles. 38, think as you like, but behave like others. 39, stir up waters to catch fish. And 40, despise the free lunch. So if you want to play along at home, you can read those. We'll talk about them in our series on the 48 laws. Please let us know what comments you have. Share any stories that you have. We'd love to hear from you. We love questions, comments, snide remarks. Feel free to take us to task. We are happy to engage in the conversation. And any parting words before we go, Joe?
Again, like I said before, stay informed. Stay informed. That is,
Stay
you
informed.
you want to master influence, you want to master power, you have to know what's going on around you. So
And there you
stay
go.
informed.
So stay informed, and join us next time for a conversation on adaptability and survival. Check out some of our other episodes, and we will talk to you soon on Masters of Influence.
That's it for this episode of Masters of Influence. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who wants to understand power. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and keep mastering the game.